There are probably literally a million reasons why a mom should ask for help. But what happens if you don't know how? What happens even when you finally have figured out the skill of how to ask for help? What happens when they say no? And what do you do about it? Today on the Fearless Future podcast, I'm going to be joined by a very special guest, Anne-Marie Williams, to talk about this concept of asking for help, why it's important, and what's at stake if we do not learn it as mothers, particularly in the postpartum season. That's what's coming up today on the Fearless Future podcast by the Guiding Star Project. Welcome to the Fearless Future podcast, where your hosts Lisa Canning and Leah Jacobson will explore what the world would look like if women didn't fear pregnancy. Through education, community, and healthcare solutions, Guiding Star Project strives to make this a reality at our physical centers across the United States. Join us. This topic of asking for help is very near and dear to my heart. As a life coach and a business coach in my other career, I just have had these conversations, these very, very real conversations with women. And for some of you listening, you might be like, this is not a skill. Like, you just ask for help and you get it, or you just ask and you deal with it if you don't get it. So for those of you who have already mastered this art, congratulations, that's an accomplishment. But my gut is there are many of you listening who understand what it's like to be disappointed, who understand what it's like to want to have somebody to watch your baby or watch your children so you can go get a break, or who understand what it's like when you do ask for help, but maybe your requests or your preferences are not honored when you receive it. I think this is a very important conversation, because if we're talking about what it looks like to build a fearless future, but we don't talk about the realities, like the realities that are just very alive and present when you have a baby and a mom is overwhelmed. If we don't talk about some of these practical strategies, we're not doing this justice. A future where no woman fears pregnancy, we've got to talk about what it looks like on the other side of having that beautiful baby. And so I'm so excited to bring to the Fearless Future podcast Anne-Marie Williams. Anne-Marie, how are you?
I'm so well, thank you.
For anyone who might not know you and your work, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So I am the managing editor at Natural Womanhood, where we are a fertility awareness organization. We talk about everything we love about fertility awareness and the things that we don't love about hormonal birth control and why that is. So I'm the managing editor there, and then I am a mom to 4 kids between the ages of almost 1 and then 8, 4 living, 1 miscarried. And I also have 10 years of nursing experience in my background as well. So I was an adult ICU nurse for many years too.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of years in the ICU. That's like high stakes, high intensity. My goodness. Thank you for all your work there. So let's talk about this topic of asking for help. Why is this particularly so important to you?
Sure. Okay. So I grew up as the second oldest of 7 kids and then 1 miscarried sibling. And I loved being part of a large family. I loved having so many siblings. I loved all of it. As I grew older, I learned that the postpartum period was a really tough time for my mom. And the other mom that we were close friends with, who also had a lot of kids, same story for her, but on steroids. And so when you're young, right, that doesn't matter that much to you because all you're seeing is the sibling part of it. But then as you get older and you're starting to think about, oh, I will hopefully be a mom, my fear, and it was a fear that I didn't acknowledge for a long time, but my fear was, this is going to happen to me. It's going to take a hit on my mental health. There's no way around it really. And it might be irreparable. Like, this might just be how it is going forward. And so I did approach all of that with a lot of fear. But after my first baby, that didn't happen. And really what it was is I had not yet been stretched beyond my, like, what I was capable of doing at that time. I was still kind of within my circle of comfort. And so at 6 weeks, I jumped right back into hardcore workouts and my overcommitments, because it wasn't commitments at that time, it was my overcommitments. So I jumped right back into those things. At 12 weeks, I was back full time on my feet in the ICU, but things changed with my second child. It had been a stressful pregnancy. I had to be induced because she had surgery when she was 2 days old. And then at 6 weeks, I was headed back to work and I had my first panic attack. And so that kicked off, I would say, a really rough couple of years following. Before what you talk about your minivan meltdown, I would describe it as my come to Jesus moment. Really, like, there's just nothing left right now but to acknowledge that all the coping mechanisms I've developed aren't working. They're not working. And so I felt so alone and so rough at that time, but it was actually an invitation. I couldn't see it at that time, but it was an invitation to something different. And so there have been lots of different things since then that have been sort of like a course correction. But a big thing has been learning to ask for help, including learning to ask for help when it looks like or comes from maybe places I didn't expect. And so that was my second pregnancy. I've had a miscarriage since then, and then 2 more children. Like I said, the youngest is almost a year old now. And so right about 2 months ago now, I started the Grit, Growth, Grace podcast. And the tagline is postpartum on purpose, because I'm just so darn passionate about what this time can be, actually. I would love for us to move as a culture away from fear of postpartum depression happening, right? Because 135,000 women are searching that on Google every single month. Right. So I think that is sort of the narrative, the way that we frame things right now. I hope that doesn't happen to me. And if it does, like, I hope I can make it through the other side. But I would love to shift from that place to a place of, what if I loved who I became during this time? What is the mindset that I need to love who I become? For this to be a challenging time where I show grit, a time where I really grow as a person, as a mom, as a wife. And then also where I just rely in a way that I've never had to before on the grace of God. So that's where the Grit, Growth, Grace came from. But yeah, that's where all of this comes. But I think learning to ask for help is a skill, like you've said. That's one of many skills that new moms have the opportunity and also the need, I would say, to develop. So yeah, that's why this is so important to me.
So I want to invite you, if you're willing, take us into that time of your second baby. You're going back to work at 12 weeks, and that's a whole other, good golly, that is a whole other topic. The postpartum, what's the word I'm looking for? Maternity leave. Like, when a woman goes back to work, that is a whole other podcast that we will do. But for now, you were 12 weeks. The baby had a surgery, so it sounds like it was a delicate time. When did you finally realize something is wrong? Like, can you pick that moment? So I have a moment where in my minivan, I can recall exactly when I was like, something has to change. Can you bring us back to that time when you knew that you had to do something different?
Right. So, I mean, it took me till she was 2.5 years old to acknowledge, oh, something's really wrong. And before that, for a long time, like early on, I had been charting Creighton method for many years. I was on HCG injections when I was cycling regularly, so I was getting hormonal supplementation. So at first, I just assumed this is a hormonal thing. I'm having a hormonal problem, and we need to fix it. And so I beat that horse to death for a very long time. And the progesterone that I got before my cycles returned, because that's something that Napro offers, it didn't make a difference. And so that was early on in the first couple months after she was born. And then after that, I just sort of kept trying to pursue this concept of, oh, there's my hormones. There's something wrong with my hormones. There's something wrong with my hormones. And I did get back on HCG when I was cycling, but my hormones turned out to be great. Like they were, when we tested them, they were where they were supposed to be. And so then I felt more lost, right? Because if you think something's wrong and you're trying to pursue that path, then it's like, okay, well, it's okay that it's not great right now because I'm not there yet, but I'm on the path. But to realize I am not on the path. it was just very deflating. And the point I needed to come to eventually was, it's not my hormones, it's my thoughts. It's my ways of relating. It's my ways of coping, of overcommitting, right? But it had to do with, it just had to do with the way that I was looking at things, the stories that I told myself. I would say it had to do a lot with the stories that I told myself.
And that's, if you haven't listened to the episode of the Fearless Future podcast right before this one, I go into a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, like just really understanding that our thoughts are optional. Yeah. Like, and I think a lot of moms don't realize. No. And it comes from, again, many of the messages you had growing up. It comes from perhaps what you define as success. It comes completely unconsciously, to be honest, until, of course, you're introduced to this concept of, hey, you know, there are actually options here for you. There's even options the way you think. And so I love that you have shared this with us, that the stories you were telling yourself, and I want to invite you, if you're willing, to get even a bit more specific with me. What was the story you were telling yourself? You talked about overcommitting. So what was the story you were saying that, you know, was important about?
Sure. Yeah, so there were several stories, I would say, intertwined. One of the key ones was, I am the strong one and other people rely on me. I am the strong one and other people rely on me. And so for me to turn around and ask people for help, I am the one who helps them, was what I thought. And when you're an ICU nurse and you're good at it, and I was good at it, then you don't ask. I mean, you ask people for help, but you already know, kind of like, you know what you need, you know how to do this. And so there's a high level of control there. And so I told myself, I'm the one who helps, not who asks for help. And I also was very uncomfortable with my own fears about all the terrible things that you hear about postpartum moms doing to their children, like the stories that you hear on the news. Every time that I'm pregnant or postpartum, like, those things come to the front for me, and they occur to me. And then the next thought is, why is that occurring to me? Oh, what does that mean about me? And right. And so then there's a rabbit trail that you can kind of follow there. And so at that time, I believed, when those sorts of horror stories come into my mind, I believed that was said something about me as a person. And I didn't know how to reassure myself. I certainly didn't know how to do anything other than berate myself, because what was the matter with me? And so learning to accept discomfort just as like an emotion, right? Emotional discomfort. Lisa, my bandwidth for that was a -70. I was so unable to be uncomfortable or to let other people be uncomfortable. And I thought, if there was a conversation, for instance, I was okay if, like, I needed to make sure the other person was comfortable in conversation. So I think both those things, I can't ask for help because I'm the one who helps. And then when I have thoughts that are frightening to me, that must be me. That is me. Rather than saying, like, I'm not my thoughts, I am not my emotions, right? Like, I can create some distance between those things. I didn't have the vocabulary or the skills to even know any of that. And so then I just isolated even more mentally, if that makes sense, because if you're the strong person, but then you're having these thoughts that you don't like, and it's like, I can't communicate that, and it doesn't fit, right? It doesn't fit with your sense of self.
Oh, you know, I Inside Out 2. At time of this recording, it's a popular movie right now, and this movie does such a good job of articulating in a fairly simple manner what happens in the brain when you are afraid, or when you don't want to feel this discomfort. So I really want to just pause for a moment on feeling discomfort. I know exactly. You and I just both exhaled, because we have both done, from what I'm gathering of your story, and I've shared a lot of mine publicly, we have both done a lot of work at getting comfortable with discomfort.
Yeah.
And I think just on this podcast, this topic today, I feel like you and I could talk for like another hour on discomfort, but
Sure.
that's the thing I think that impedes people the most around asking for help, is that there is something deeply uncomfortable. And so for you, it was, I'm the person who helps, I'm the ICU nurse. So it's like very uncomfortable. For me, it was a lot of, and it still is, if I'm being really honest, pride, just straight up
Sure.
pride. Like my story is more like you should be able to do this. Like it's a lot of should,
Especially if you have more than 2 kids. You should be able to do this. You chose this.
Yeah. So I guess if you can resonate with anything that we're saying, just to take a pause wherever you're listening to this and literally pause. And if you had to answer the question, what is the story you are telling yourself that is stopping you from asking for help? And it might require some deeper digging. It might require some journaling. It might require some therapy, some counseling, a good talk with a girlfriend. There's a lot of things. I don't think on this podcast we're going to help you in that way right now, right here. But that's such a powerful question. What is the story that you are telling yourself that's impeding you from asking for help? So thank you for sharing your story with us. So once you did get aware, so you had a moment, you had a breaking point, a boiling point. What did you do to actually get the help you needed?
Sure. So the first thing that I did was start counseling. And I had been recommended counseling previous to that, but I told myself, because I've never had a major trauma, right? Like a capital T trauma has not happened to me. Then I have nothing to say. I have nothing to say in counseling. I shouldn't need that. So when the come to Jesus moment happened, it was like, well, here we go. And so I reached out to somebody from the Catholic Psych Institute, and she's now on her own now, but the therapist that I worked with there was absolutely lovely. And she wasn't worried by me. And as soon as I realized that, I just went, oh, okay. Right? Because the biggest thing about anxiety, right, is that I'm in danger. And so when she communicated to me that I wasn't in danger, she didn't think I was in danger. It was like, oh, okay. And once we were able to start from that point, right, then she encouraged me to do a Catholic mindfulness course, not as a spiritual practice, but because anxiety and panic was so baked into my physical response at that time, just like everyday physical existence, that really helped kind of with a lot of the physical symptoms, I would say. Just like, oh, okay. I don't need to resist those when they happen. And the less I resist, the less often they'll happen. Oh, how nice. So it started with counseling. It moved on with Catholic mindfulness. And then I ended up really connecting with Metanoia Catholic, because their tagline is take every thought captive for Christ. So that was where I really learned for the first time, your thoughts are optional. And they don't have to mean anything about you. You get to choose that. And anxiety course was extraordinarily helpful to me. Started off with a book that was really funny, and then the course after that. But then these sort of mind things led to physical things, like I have a grandma tribe. And this is now the horn that I will blow and the drum that I will beat all day long for moms.
The grandma tribe.
Your grandma tribe. I don't just think you need a mom squad, right? Your mom squad is other moms, right? And I hear sometimes, if you need help, link up with another mom, and maybe she'll watch your kids and you'll watch her kids. Sure. Okay, but if you have a lot of kids, or she does, or both of you do, that might be a lot of children. So certainly that is an option, but I love the option of the grandma tribe, because it's somebody who isn't in your same state, right? And so I have a grandma tribe member for every kid, and I give extra credit points for more than one. And essentially it comes down to this. usually they're people about grandma age compared to me, right? So like my parents' age or thereabouts. And there could be a ton of reasons that you end up wanting a grandma tribe. Maybe your family doesn't live close by. Maybe your family is caring for somebody else, right? Like maybe they have aging parents that they're caring for. Maybe it's not emotionally a good fit for you. Maybe you've made that prudential judgment call, like they live, in town, but I can't, like, that's actually not healthy or safe for us. So there could be lots of reasons that bring you to this place of my family, which is right, like the first kind of default. There could be lots of reasons that you come to this point of, hey, like for whatever reason, right now, that's not an option. Or it's an option in a very limited way, Rich, because I think for most people, it's not like an all or nothing, but it tends to be, I need more help or I need help in these specific ways. And those I'm not able to get from them. So I can receive help in these ways, but not in other ways that I need help. Okay, so you've identified your need for your grandma tribe. And typically this would be people of a certain age. Okay, like I said, but really what you're looking for is a heart to serve and time to help you. A heart to serve and time to help you. And we have found grandma tribe members through our church. We found them in our neighborhood. I found them through the community women's club that I was in for a time. My best friend is not grandma tribe age, but she's a grandma tribe member because she sets up our meal train after every baby. And like she took my 2 older kids on a firefly walk, a month or so ago. Like she took them. I can ask her, hey, there's this thing. It doesn't really make sense for me to go with all of the kids, but I would love for my big kids to have this opportunity. Is this something you might have time for? Yes.
This is so much fun. Okay, so we're going to unpack this quite a bit because I find this fascinating. I love you articulate mom squad versus grandma tribe. I love the differentiation there because it's just right on. Like, it's just true. Like a mom squad is great and you need that camaraderie. And yes, if you have an option where you can help each other, that's amazing. But what happens when a kid gets sick? What happens when, just reality is like in the exact same state. Okay. So that's so fascinating. How did you find your first grandma for each of you?
So So it was actually a couple. She's watching my kids right now. Actually, like they are at her house at the farm with her right now. But we met them because we sat right in front of them at church. They were in the pew behind us and they were grandparent age. And so eventually, like my kids wiggled their way back to their pew. And so we just got to talking to them, got to be friends with them. And that was the first one. But then the second one, so this is something else too. Usually when people say, let me know how I can help, you don't exactly think they mean it. And maybe they don't 100% think they mean it, right? But people don't say that to me anymore, Lisa. They do not say that to me anymore if they don't actually mean it, because I will figure something out. Like I will figure out a way for them to help. So Miss Louise is another OG Grandma Tribe member. And she made a blanket, I think, while I was pregnant. She was also in our church, but she sat some pews back. Okay, so she made a blanket for my third, and said something like, let me know how I can help in the card. And so I was like, okay. And going from like, I am the strong one who doesn't ask for help to I do ask for help, it was an easier transition because I was asking help of somebody who was grandma age and not a peer, if that makes sense. Like there was something that was easier to do about that.
Yeah. And we talk about this at Guiding Star a lot when we are looking at hiring and when we're looking at job performance. Like a metric of capacity. Like, do they have the capacity to do this job? A grandma, if they've got adult children and they don't have a bunch of little selves, they very likely they may have the capacity to do this kind of thing. Okay, so continue. So Miss Louise.
Right. Because part of the story when I told myself like I'm the one who helps other people, part of that story was true. a lot of the women that were my age who had kids also, it was true that they didn't have the bandwidth to really help me at that time. So part of that, right, was victimhood, but also part of it was true. Okay, but Miss Louise is in a different spot. Her grandkids are actually like 20 and above now, you know? And another one of our grandmas, who I'll get to in a minute, like her grandkid lives in Texas. I live in Illinois, right? So grandma aged, but not local grandchildren. Okay, so I just said, would it be possible for you to come over for an hour and a half and play with my kids on a Thursday? And that's exactly what happened. I was here. I didn't go anywhere, but she just came and she played with all of them. And then we just kept doing that. And my son is 2.5 now. So every Thursday for an hour and a half, she comes. Occasionally, I'll run around town, like if I need to. We live in a really small town. So maybe I'm going to the post office or the library, but usually I'm here working. I'm doing work, and she just plays with the kids. Sometimes they walk to the park. Sometimes they stay here, but she brings books for them to read, and she buys little things at Goodwill for them to play with. Just like, like that's, I love it. I love it. And she also is special because she's teaching me a lot of things. A story that I used to believe was, if my kids misbehave, other people will leave. Like they won't have anything to do with us. And so I need my kids to behave, because otherwise people won't help, or they won't want to be friends with us, really. But Miss Louise is really teaching me, like, I'm coming on Thursday, whether your kids are well behaved or not, you know? Oh,
And Marie. Okay, so here's the thing that I really want to help people process. Okay,
sure.
There's some out of the box thinking. There's some just a willingness to bend in your preference, let's call it, you know. But what I really, again, I'm going to highlight this. It's there's a lot of healing that potentially needs to be done in order for this to happen. And just, you said something very, very beautiful there, that if my children misbehave, people will leave. And I've coached a lot of women. The behavior of their children, you know, like that they're an extension of them. And so if they succeed, oh, I'm succeeding. But then if they fail, oh, I'm failing, you know? And my goodness, everybody, that is an unfair expectation to put on everyone. Like, it's just unfair. We're humans. You fail, I fail, we all fail. Like, we just do. That is just an experience. When your kid does something wrong, it's okay. It just is. You will get over it. They will get over it. And especially the behavior we're talking about, you know, of course, serious things that happen that have major consequences. Of course, those are very challenging to navigate. But what I'm talking about right now is like when a kid throws a tantrum, you know, and like dumps the whole dinner on the floor, you know, or even whips it at you. Like those kinds of normal childhood, just defiant behavior, like that, it's gonna be okay. But it requires healing. There's a lot of like, what does this say about me? What does this mean about the future? What does this mean about my ability to mom or have more children? Enough, everybody, enough. Like the healing that has to happen. I just want to pause on that point. The healing that has to happen is really quite necessary. And I love that that's what's coming out of this conversation. But I do want to, let's get practical again, because I can hear the naysayers. Okay. So the naysayers are saying things like, yeah, but wasn't this woman a stranger at some point? And how on earth could you trust her coming into your home? Sure. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, sure. Right. So I had some sense of who she was, because I knew her from I knew who she was from my church, but it's totally true that we were strangers to each other. Like people know me at my church because they sit behind my children and observe them. And I don't necessarily know them, right? Because like my kids are going, wow, making faces at them, and I'm not turned around looking at them too. And so I've just found that sometimes people feel very comfortable with my children and I don't quite know their name. But there's both like a calculated risk, I would say. Like you take a calculated risk. chances are decent, right? I go to church with you. Chances are decent. You're a good person. Also, you made a quilt for my baby. Awesome. Okay. So when you give me a card and it says, let me know how I can help you, then I'm going to give you a chance. Now, if something had been odd or strange, then we just wouldn't have done that. And even still, like I said, I'm here. Like, I'm here when she comes. That's not always the case with Grandma Tribe members, but like, I'm here when she comes. And the thing is, too, I'm asking for what she's able to give. Something I think is really important when we're preparing for postpartum and when we're pregnant is not just what do I need, but who can help me and what can they help me with? Because if I'm going from their strengths, what they are good at, then I have a much higher likelihood of success rather than just starting with, well, what do I need and who can do it? But no, who do I know and what are they good at? And so, yes, she was a stranger at one time.
This is an important pivot, or I'd like to make the pivot to talk about family, because I think it's very common for a lot of the women I've coached. They will say to me, oh, I could never start a business because I don't have family. Oh, I haven't been on a date night for 3 years because I don't have family nearby.
Sure.
Even things, Anne-Marie, like I could never have another child because I don't have family nearby. Now, everybody, hear me loud and clear. We moved back to Canada in order to have a bit more proximity to both sets of our parents. I like my parents. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying don't be close to family, but I do think that it's just, number one, it's not the reality of everybody to have family. It's just not a reality. And number two, it might not be your preference. And so let's talk a little bit about that. How do you, number one, even get aware of your own thoughts and feelings around your family? Number two, how do you navigate it when you don't have family? But then I really do want to talk about what happens when your family is helping you, but it's maybe not in the way you prefer. So you begin wherever you want to begin with that.
Sure. Yeah, so I just want to be very sensitive to the fact that there are all kinds of situations, right? And typically, I think Now, maybe it takes something like counseling or a conversation with a close friend, or in my case, if you're married, your spouse. But two things come to mind. One, I think and if you don't know, somebody close to you does, right? So sometimes we just need to listen to the people who are close to us and we say that we trust instead of shutting out what they say. Okay. So if, for instance, maybe it's not you, but maybe it's your spouse that's saying, hey, it seems like you're actually more stressed when we're with your family or anticipating gathering or after gathering. It actually seems like you're more stressed than relaxed. And if that's the case, is it worth it to you? Are you going to think or believe I have to pay for this in some way, right? Like, or I'm going to pay afterwards because we got together, but then you get a phone call afterwards about your behavior, for instance, or something that was not up to par. So, okay. So I think or somebody close to you knows if it's not a great fit. And if that's the case, then I think you get to be strategic. Rather than in most cases saying all or nothing, like you are out of my life or you're the only person I call for help. I think you can really look to that question of what is it they're able to offer? What are they able to offer me? Maybe your family can bring meals over. Maybe they can stock your fridge after the baby's born. But maybe you're not going to ask them to come and stay with you for 2 weeks after the baby's born. And you might say, well, how do I not that's uncomfortable. And we don't like being uncomfortable. Okay. But if you looked at this from a little bit different lens, which is my love is the light of my entire home. I heard that on a retreat several years ago. Mother Anne-Marie, I was in spirit direction, I guess, with her. And she just said, your love is the light of your home. And if that's the case, and everybody is orbiting in a sense, right? Not in a self-absorbed way, but is orbiting around your love, and needs you to be as healthy as possible, then there will be some discomfort of saying, here's what I need, here's what I don't need. But it is worth it to endure the short-term discomfort to say, here's what would be healthiest for me and for my baby, especially when I am most vulnerable, like in the postpartum period you are. Here's what it's going to take for that to happen. And maybe that's a conversation you have with your spouse where you script it out. And scripting is weird, except that it can be helpful. Maybe you think, well, that's not going to sound natural. Okay. Maybe it's not going to sound natural. But if this is what it takes for you to be healthy and to have the help that you need in specific ways, but not in others, then maybe that is the sacrifice that you make of the short-term discomfort to say, what's going to be healthiest for me and for my baby, right?
Again, coming back to this theme of being uncomfortable with discomfort, yeah. Clearly we need to have a conversation on this topic. I want to offer some practical stories from my life and with my family. So I've got 10 kids, ages 15 down to 8 months. And I would say that in the beginning stages, my parents were just like workhorses, and they lived right around the corner. And I would say in that stage, that is what was helpful and like needed. It was helpful to have like literal workhorses. They would come in and they would literally do all my laundry, do all my dishes. Like it would be like a miracle. Like they would leave and the whole house was like pristine, right? But later on, I was desiring like, no, I just actually want you to sit here with me and like talk to me, like have a cup of coffee, sit here and talk to me. Like that's actually what I need. But it would be interesting. Like it was very difficult for them. They just couldn't. Like they're very. I mean, I'm like this too. Like really love to get things done. I could sort of see the mess like beyond my head, and I could tell my parents were just like clean that up. And so eventually, I kind of just like accepted. Okay, when they come over, you can probably a couple minutes. They're not totally robotic. They're very lovely human beings. You can for sure get some moments of like just deep connection and hey, how are you doing? But then actually just let them go do their thing. And like they're gonna be real happy and you're gonna be really happy. I have other examples. My parents are wonderfully what's the word? They're getting older. they are getting older. And so I've learned over the years, same thing. It's like what they can tolerate energy wise. And so we just got really strategic. I'll give you just a practical example. My husband and I was New York City for Fox and Friends. And so navigating how to do childcare for the rest of the kids that stayed home so that I could go to New York City and my husband could work with me while I did live TV, we get really strategic. So for example, it would be a lot for my parents to have all the kids for like a 72-hour period, let's say, but like they can definitely be the adults in the house to make sure that everyone's safe, right? And then we bring in babysitters as needed, maybe at high peak times. Do you know what I mean? So like meals or times of great transition. For example, getting my kids off to school and back. I think that would be just a lot. My dad doesn't drive my passenger van, like even logistically. So finding someone who could drive the passenger van, all those kinds of things. So, just there's some very practical stories. I remember having the aha about my dad particularly, and he wouldn't mind me sharing this at all. His love language is acts of service. I remember being like, I just wish he wouldn't like change all my light bulbs and wouldn't put all the batteries in the remote controls. Like I remember literally thinking, I just want him to sit with me. And then I remember being like, wow, your dad just changed every single light bulb. Like literally, I remember thinking, I have not had to change a battery in a remote control or control toy or any toy, like anything. All batteries in the canning house were always fresh because of my dad when we lived closer to them. And same thing with light bulbs. I wouldn't even think about it. It was just like complete autopilot. And it just helped me to shift my perspective, And it took, for me, it took some experience, Anne Marie. Like it really took like getting clear, first of all, of, oh, okay, why am I feeling annoyed? Why am I feeling, and then realizing, oh, okay, I have some options here. I have some options, but let's also just recognize like what they're really good at and be flexible, in those kinds of things. So what else do people need to consider when dealing with family, or when maybe family isn't helping in the way that you would prefer? What are some other things we need to consider?
Sure. I think what your end goal is, if your end goal is, I want to have an ongoing relationship with them, then you need to consider, okay, how often and how much are we going to be in contact, right? Because if you're saying, well, they live 2 hours away and I see them once a month or once every other month or on the holidays, okay, well then when little things bother me, right, do I need to bring those things up with them? Or is it really actually a better use of my time to just say, okay, well, that was what it was, and maybe that'll guide my decisions about what I ask for help with in the future. But I think that's different from if you're saying like, no, actually, once a week, my kid is going over there for 6 hours, and so there are these things that I need to address with them because we are in pretty much constant contact and I'm relying on them in some way.
Yeah.
I think then you get the option to address things and say specifically, here's the behavior, not pointing at the person, but pointing at the behavior. Here's the behavior that doesn't work for me. And then what can we do about that, essentially, and inviting them. This is something my husband is really good at, and I did not come into our marriage very good at, but my husband's family is really good at telling you what they think and then trusting that you're a big girl and you'll get there.
Okay.
And I just I more tended to approach things as like, I need to tell you, and then I need to tell you again when it hasn't gotten better, and tell you again and tell you again. But they are much more like, no, you're a grown up. You can get to this conclusion. And I think that is a place of more self-confidence to say like, no, I said to you what I needed to say. And I trust that you are a grown up and you're going to be able to get there on your own. And it's not up to me to control or manipulate you till you do what I want. And so I think from an asking for help perspective, I think you can say, here are the things that I need, or here are the behaviors that I need to change. And then respect the other person's freedom to respond how they will. If they are free to respond how they will, then you may end up deciding like, oh, I actually need to find another option for 6 hours a week on Mondays, right? Like that may be the case.
And then you go to some of these outside the box strategies that we've been talking about in this episode. Like, who is your grandma tribe? Who is your grandma tribe? I love this concept of the grandma tribe because it does provide some framework around, okay, you're looking for somebody potentially grandparent age. You're looking for somebody with capacity. So that might mean they don't have people around, or they're not caregiving for anyone. I think the capacity and the interest piece is really important. I'm going to tell one story about grandma tribe. We were just getting back to Canada after living in Florida. So this was one of our first Sundays. Like, honestly, I think it was maybe the third or fourth Sunday back. Sure. And we were reconnecting with a bunch of friends. And so one said friend, we said, why don't we meet at Mass? And then we can just like catch up a little bit after Mass. We'll let the kids play in this park. It was winter, but it was a nice sunny day. So, we'll probably get like a good, decent amount of time as long as it's not too cold, right? Yeah. And so Mass is at 11 o'clock or something. And so it was lunchtime, and naturally everyone's hungry. So we were kind of thinking through, okay, well, we could go to a restaurant or we could grab takeout. And this wonderful friend was just like, leave it with me. Go take your kids to the park. So the park was right across from the church. He was just like, take your kids to the park. I'll come back with lunch. And I just remember being like, this is music to my ears. Yeah. And he came back with a stack full of pizzas and a whole thing of like a bag of drinks and whatever. And I remember pulling out my wallet, being like, oh my gosh, let me, Venmo you money, whatever. And he was like, No. And he, it was beautiful. He literally said, I have a full-time job and I have
Yeah.
no dependencies. Like, allow me, please, to give you this gift of a meal for your family. I'm getting quite emotional even talking about it because it's I think when you have a hard time asking for help,
Mm-hmm.
things that you've got to examine in yourself. There's a wound that you've got, which is just reality. We don't
Yeah.
need to judge it. We don't need to analyze it too much.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to be aware that you
Yeah.
got it, right? And so even telling that story hits this very vulnerable spot for me that
Mm-hmm.
just part of the healing process. Allow
Yeah.
people to help you. And I just remember being like, that's amazing. And now I have a word for it. You are part of my Justin, you are part of my grandma tribe. You have joined the Thank
Yeah.
you for feeding my family of 10 kids with pizza on that
Yeah.
very day. And so, what else about the grandma tribe can people take from today's conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So it can look a lot of different ways, right? Like we have a grandma who comes and reads to our kids when she's in town. So her kids are or her grandkids are out of state. And so a lot of times she's on the road, seeing them. But when she's not, she'll text me and say, hey, are we reading on Friday at 9? You bet we are. You bet we are. So she'll come over and she'll read. And that's actually a real gift to me too, because sometimes, all of my kids will pay attention, but especially the older two will. And I love that when I have a new baby in the house, this is especially earlier on, I love the idea that somebody is paying special attention to my big kids. I love that somebody is with them and for them. And another grandma, she's a retired teacher, right? So she has that heart, for arts and crafts and teaching and children. And so she'll come over and she'll bring a craft, she'll read a book, and they'll do a craft together. And they just did that earlier this week. Now, before that, we hadn't seen her for, I don't know, a month or so, maybe a month and a half, because it's summer, right? And people are doing things. But she comes over, it's specialized attention that they get just for them. And what a gift that is. So we have another lady who I've got my eye on. She doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to invite her to be a Grandma Tribe member because she lives in our neighborhood and doesn't have any grandchildren and would love to have grandchildren. And so my thought is like, maybe my kids could go on a walk with her once a week, once every other week, right? Like maybe they could go on a walk with her or ride their bikes with her. So yeah, I always have this thought of like, is this somebody we could invite? Because that's the thing too. You're respecting their freedom. You're inviting them. You're not expecting, you're certainly not demanding. You're inviting them to be part of something. And it's a gift to be asked to help. So it's a gift that you are offering to somebody else. They get to do what they want with it. But our Grandma Tribe members, like I mention them at the bottom of our family Christmas letter, every year, like honorable mention goes to, and then I list our Grandma Tribe members. We'll make cookies for them. We'll invite them over for birthdays sometimes. Occasionally I'll just like buy them flowers or something, but like these are people whose lives are interwoven with ours now. And what a privilege that is. And so the initial discomfort of like, what if they say no? And then we keep going to church together. Wow, or just not knowing how it's going to go, right? Like that initial discomfort is so worth it for the gift that these people are offering my family.
Anne Marie, you're making me, the wheels are turning. I'm kind of like, I would like to start pre-vetted grandma tribes at our Guiding Star centers, right? So like you apply to be a grandma, whether you're a grandma or not. Yep. Maybe we have some kind of, police check or at least, some kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And then we got this pool of grandmas in all our local communities. I am literally going to pitch this at our next directors meeting.
Well, I mean, like in the NICU, right? They have people that volunteer to come and rock babies so that they have that connection. Human connection and contact is so important, right? And especially if you're a grandma whose grandkids are out of state, who's hugging you? My children are. My children are hugging you.
I could talk to you all day, but I'll end on another personal story about this. We met a couple. They were introduced to us at another church we were attending. This was when my family was much younger. And they literally reached out to the parish priest because they had just moved. And they said, we are grandparents. Our grandkids are across the country. We miss them terribly. Please introduce us to young families because we would love to help in any way we can. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. When the parish priest told us this, I was like, who, like, this is weird. Who are these people? Are they going to be weird? Like, I literally had those thoughts, right? But I was like, we can go and have a coffee, you know? So I think our first meeting was probably like after church in the hall, that kind of a thing. But I do think our first meeting, sort of more private, was in our home. We just said, well, would you like to come over for lunch? I think it was one day after Mass. They came over for lunch. We got to know each other and we reached a level of comfort where we were like, cool, you want to keep coming over and hanging out? And we ended up becoming friends with this couple who, you know, at least 20 or 25 years older than us. And and they ended up being beautiful, kind of, like familiar place people to my small kids. So it's very possible to ask for help. It's very possible to get help. And it's also very possible to advocate for the kind of help you need. And what I'm hearing is that it requires some healing, like we've talked about several times. It requires some awareness. It requires some out of the box thinking, and it requires your grandma squad, grandma tribe. I love this so much. You can have both. Anne-Marie, where can people go to learn more about you, your work, and your podcast?
Sure. So 2 places. I'm on Instagram at Grit Growth Grace. No periods in between, just 3 words straight in a row. And then the podcast is Grit Growth Grace with dots in between. So grit.growth.grace. It's on Apple, Amazon Music, Spotify, the major ones. Oh and I post every Wednesday. I post a new episode every Wednesday at nap time. And I don't know exactly when nap time is, so I just say at nap time, and that's when it comes out. And my friend calls them snack-sized episodes because I say you can listen to one in the time it takes to fold a load of laundry or nurse your baby or wash a sink full of dishes. The longest one so far is 18 minutes, and the shortest one is 8. So they're just very small bites on all kinds of different things related to postpartum. And yeah, I hope it serves people. It's a real joy for me. And from the feedback I've gotten so far, it resonates with others.
Well, listen, this podcast has served me. I am very, very grateful for it. If we're going to create a fearless future where women don't fear pregnancy, this is a really essential component, because the fear of being alone, the fear of not being able to handle it, these are all very valid fears, but I hope this conversation gives people some empowerment that they can think outside the box and actually get the help that they need. Thank you, Anne-Marie. So great spending time with you. Everyone, thank you for joining us on the Fearless Future podcast. We'll see you next time.